Let me preface this with I, Racco2, am not T3, nor do I claim to be. I'm using T3 as generalization of all competition beneath CL, as that is what the teams I got were. But without further delay, let me get into this. Welcome to the summarization of T3 siege roles in a single video explaining which stats matter and which ones don't. There's a lot of arguments over what really is important and what's not, and what correlates with plan and what doesn't, etc. So I got bored one day in my AP Psych class and started thinking, wait a minute, I can check all this by myself. I have all the data for it, why not? So I got to work and just slapped the stats up into a single spreadsheet and was like, oh, this is pretty neat. So I ended up posting it on Twitter and kept having some thoughts about what I want to do. So I decided I want to expand this beyond myself and put it on other people too. So I ended up actually getting some data and had a few players to actually summarize and make generalizations about the whole T3 team off of. And I know this is going to go swimmingly because people love when I have something to say about R6 as seen. So yeah, it should be fun. Hope you guys enjoy the video, and it should be good. For starters, in order to analyze the state of roles in R6, I need the data to actually use. So obviously I posted on Twitter, but I did end up getting a few stats from some of the teams. Not all of them were equally complete, but the ones that were kept anonymous for the sake of those teams. It's not very complex, but that isn't where it ends. What I evaluate and why each role got its specific stats measured is an important question to ask. So what's important? Well, I started off thinking all the stats I had available to me, and since I started off with myself, how I know what's important and my influence on a round and what I do generally. Obviously KD, I was curious if kills per round had any influence. I thought plant percentage is obviously a no-brainer because I'm hard support, and that was measured by doing total plants over total rounds on any given map. Survival percentage was obviously important. KOS rating and player rating are both important as well. And obviously, that has to all be compared to map win rate to have any sort of influence over anything. Then after seeing my data and making a tweet about it, I wanted to see every other role, and every player known to man practically. The stats I was checking for remained the same, with the exception of plant percentage, and that was changed to be entry differential percentage. And all that is just opening kills minus opening deaths divided over the total rounds played on any given map, which is then converted to a percentage. This is a practical method of getting the entry differential with consideration to the round plays on any given map, so that way the entry success can actually be evaluated. I think the data in this data set is pretty valid as a whole, as there's something like 4,000 plus rounds played on each role essentially. So I think overall this should be pretty strong for each role and what they are. Just for the sake of viewer comprehension, I'm about to explain some terms, so it makes sense without me having to re-explain the meaning for each one. A correlation is the strength of a connection between two given variables. This is known as the R value. A positive correlation means that there's a trend upwards, and in this case, it means the more of a given statistic, it means there's the more wins. A negative correlation means that it trends downwards, and it would mean the inverse, aka the more you shoot back, the less likely you are to win and plant, whatever it is. The differing strengths are referring to the correlations themselves, and that's all that means. The R squared value is, as the name would suggest, the correlation value squared. This explains the proportion variance of a given independent variable, as explained by that independent variable, changing in a regression model. If this makes no sense to you, just take the square root of the R squared value and accept that the closer you are to 1, the stronger the correlation is generally. Now, as for entries, there's no positive correlation between survival percentage and win percentage at all. There is a weak positive correlation between KD win percentage and KPR and win percentage, being R squared at 0.261 and 0.295 respectively. And there's another weak positive correlation between entry percentage and win percentage with an R squared value of 0.283, which is pretty surprising when you consider the fact that entry's whole job is getting that higher entry differential. And there's also a pretty strong correlation between KOS and win percentage at 0.459 and player rating and win percentage at 0.501. Then when you apply this to the outlier rule, and I'm going to use the standard equation given AP statistics and nothing else, which is quartile 1 minus 1.5 times the IQR being the difference between quartile 1 and quartile 3. And for the upper bound, it's just Q3 plus 1.5 times the RQR, which is the same thing as it was in the first one. And that yielded some pretty interesting results, it seems. As to the outliers themselves, there's no correlation between survival percentage, KD, KPR, and entry differential percentage with win percentage. I think it's fair to excuse entry percentage and KD in this case, just due to the fact that they are higher without, and I think it's just the fact that the outlier was just below that threshold, so I think it's fair to leave them on this list so that way there's a correlation which makes sense. Flex, however, is probably the weirdest 0.1. It was absolutely mind-boggling to me, but I think it makes sense considering what the flex roll is. So there was no correlation with any real stat and the given round. The closest was an R-squared value of 0.15, and that's in regards to the survival percentage and the round wins. Second highest was a 0.122 with entry percentage, and that makes sense at first because you're like, oh, well, a flex has to get engagement every once in a while. But it's a negative correlation, so I don't know what that means to say. So I think it's important to look at the individuals in that case. And even when you remove the outliers, the correlation actually got significantly worse. The survival percent R-squared value, which is previously the highest one, dropped by 3,750%. So I don't have an explanation for you. Flex players, like, you're wild. I think it makes sense considering what your role is. You kind of just fill in what the team needs. So naturally, if you need to shoot back, you're going to shoot back more. If you need to do whatever. So it makes sense, I guess. When you look at what the role is, it's a lot more than just shooting people. So it's like making the vert and being an intelligent player as a whole. Flex is typically one of the smartest players on a team. So that's part of it. Now with soft supports, there's a lot of interesting things to look at here. Entry differential percent is the highest correlation in an R-squared value of 0.421. This is likely to them getting just cutoff picks, whatever it is. But surprisingly enough, it's negative correlation, which is actually pretty surprising because you'd figure, oh, if you get the cutoff picks on a roam, then surely you're set up to win the round from there. But for some reason, it seems to be negative. So whatever it may be. But the player rating is the second highest at 0.196. But it seems to be a negative correlation as well. And this would also make sense, kind of, because when a soft supports to get frags, their entries are failing. But that's not really even entry or KD. It's just player rating, which is a summarization of a lot of different stats. Now, KOS and survival percentage seem to have minimal impact on any given round from what I observed. And both have an R-squared value of 0.1, and it doesn't really show a lot of correlation, but it's possible that this is just the case because of one bad case, which I'll get into when we start looking at the individualized cases. But across all of them, it's pretty clear that KPR and KD have zero influence on how the round goes, with a 0.001 and a 0.004 correlation value, and there's no value in them getting a ton of frags generally. And also something worth noting is there were no outliers in this data set, so congratulations, soft sports. Now, as for hard supports, in the original tweet I mentioned that I evaluated myself and I saw the different things that were important, and so I think it's worth expanding on them here for the generalization of all hard supports. Now, I ignored entry plus or minus differential and percentages because I think that generally if a hard supports take the first engagement of a round, it's because they rushed, and I think it's heavily dependent on the player of how they react to it and also how they get their team back to site. Because there's a lot of times a rush will happen and then they're not even the first one taking an engagement because they can just say, okay, they're coming XYZ, and here's how I need someone to come back to it. So, whatever it is, I don't think it's a fair evaluation, so I think that's a worthless statistics, and I think that's only useful for defense. Now, there's a weak negative correlation with plants going down in the KD, and this is usually probably due to the fact that when more people are dead, there's no longer need to plant, and I think that kind of makes sense, logically speaking, because why would you plant if, let's say you killed 3 people, now there's only 2 left, and it's 5v2, whatever it is, but, it makes sense why you wouldn't want to plant if you've killed everyone in the lobby. Now, win percentage and player rating has a strong positive correlation. Although the R-squared value is 0.233, the points are really tightly grouped, and I think that's fair enough to call it a strong correlation. Win percentage and plant percentage are directly correlated, it would seem. However, there is a strong positive correlation of 0.42, with only 2 points deviating below the line. So that's, generally speaking, very strong. The only outlier I found in this entire thing across all the hard supports was that the KOS was 1. It didn't even increase above a margin of 0.1 R-squared. So safe to say that regardless of outlier or not, it's insignificant in the case of a hard support. Now, there are some questions to be answered. Obviously, I popped out something on Twitter about this because there's a lot of things that I'm curious about, and also my brain is not exactly perfect when it comes to what am I going to, come up with ideas for. I only had a few at the time, and people were helpful, so I think that's worth covering. And obviously, I mentioned earlier that soft supports have individualized cases of things where they seem like they'd be important, like KOS and survival percent. And I think that genuinely it was just one bad piece of data, which infected the whole data set, which is why it was an issue. Because in one of the samples, they had literally zero correlation basically with the rest of the data. and everyone else besides that one soft support had very strong correlations, as seen here. The two pieces of data from it that I consider the bad sample of the bunch are just in direct contrast with other subjects, so I genuinely think that it's fair to say that KOS and 5% are both important for soft supports. But now, before I deep dive into the rest of the individualized cases I think are interested out of my own will, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the misconceptions and conceptions in the first place that were asked on Twitter. So, obviously, entries, what's more important? Entry KD or KD overall? Both the summation of with and without the outliers lean towards KD. In the case of the non-adjusted, it's significantly more close, but the correlation is stronger with the KD. However, the slope is far deeper for entry differential percentage. Therefore, I think it's more impactful for an entry to go positive on entry differential than it is for them to go positive KD. On the adjusted, this is practically just flat lines because Skyscraper is an outlier, and the individual cases I found was much more stable to have a correlation with KD, which is why I will answer KD on this. But I think that in being influential in terms of the whole data set, it's possible that having a higher entry KD is more important, but KD seems more stable to go with as an answer. Now on to the next one. Hard supports need a solid plant percentage. I think this is a pretty well-held belief, and I think that it's definitely fair because they are the one getting the bomb down, and they're the one who set up a position to do so. So according to the data, yes, this is true. In the regular and outlier graph, it's shown the importance of plant percentage and win percentage, and the subject's graphs were even stronger, improving this with graphs as tight as this one. Alexander Player had the question of, do flexes need to get trade kills? And my question from there is, do trade kills have an influence on win rate? Now, I don't really have enough data on this, if I'm honest with you. I think that the 400 rounds or so I had wasn't really enough for me to make an accurate assumption. It's literally 1/10 of the total data set. So, this is the roster of Zoma, Toki, Taco, Lunik, and I. So, take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. And I wasn't really measuring this originally. So, thanks, Alex, for bringing this up to my attention. I think this is pretty important. Generally speaking, it seems like hard supports seem to have minimal or no influence with trades regarding round win percentage and plant percentage. And I think my confusion on why hard support getting trades comes from the fact that analysts doesn't actually explain how they get the data. So I'm not going to try and explain it. My guess is I'm not going to be in a position to get traded out or to even get those trades because I'm joining or whatever else it is. But I'm generally unsure because it wasn't just it just doesn't make sense. Generally, I'm unsure. Soft support. Taco seems to be having no influence until outliers are removed. Upon removal, Taco has a very strong correlation between trades and win percentage. This isn't really shocking as soft sports are usually falling up for a refrag somewhere on the battlefield, so kind of makes sense when you think about it. Toki, our flex player at the time, kind of sticks with the standard of flexes are the jack of all trades, master of none. Minimal correlation as shown, even with the outliers gone, but I would lean towards yes, as there's kind of an increase, but there's just 3 points that are all over the place. Now as for our entries, I honestly can't even explain to you what the hell is going on with Zoma's graph. This dude has a polynomial trade to win percentage. When the outliers might even be considered. His graph is linear, but there are 3 points where to show off the curve that they have a high win rate. Lunix is by far the most consistent though, with a relatively stable increase of trade to win percentage. So I think it's fair to say that an entry needs to get a good trade percentage as well. Primate said, your role is not an excuse to play bad, which is kind of begging the question of what is most important to each role to be evaluated upon if you played bad or not, which is just what is most important to win rounds for each role. So off correlation and increase, it's going to vary, but for entries, it's pretty clear that player rating is most important as it factors basically every stat, all of which need to be good for entry generally. For flex, literally anything but throw percentage shows a negative correlation, so a bit more of a deep dive is needed. In this case, because throw percentage is stupid considering the round win condition basically being left alive, I have to nosedive even deeper. When I take the data for individuals, I think I would lean toward flexes generally relying on higher KDs and KPRs to have a positive influence on a round. Soft supports are the most affected by their survival percentage, and although I dismiss this for flexes, it makes sense for supports who typically have execute util or are the linchpin and execute for cutting players off or whatever it may be in the given round. For hard supports, the next truth lies somewhere in the middle based on how your team plays. A high plant percentage obviously translates to higher win percentage, but to get that plant down, it seems like a player rating is the only way that it actually influences the two of those. So I think plant percentage is first, obviously, to get round wins, but if you have a high player rating, then you're more likely to have planted or won a round as a hard support, so it's somewhere in the middle there. I don't know where it is exactly. Melanie said that a first entry doesn't always have to be a top fragger, and she also mentioned something like team for refrags, but that's something I can really prove. I do have trades, but I kind of just talked about Alex's question, and I'm unclear what they even are in the first place because analysts don't make it clear. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at, although I'd be inclined to agree with you in general, there's a moderately strong connection between KD as well as entry differential percentage and win rate. Off raw data alone, my opinion is that entries do need to have a high win percentage on their individual engagements in order to boost the team's win rate. And the final question is, who does KD even matter for? It only really matters to the entries according to the raw data. It matters to hard supports because if the hard support's dropping 20, then his team is probably losing rounds because he's in poor positions to do so. Tokyo is literally the only flex out of all the data I had who had any real strong correlation between KD and win percentage. He's just hard like that, I guess. I'm inclined to believe yet again that one bad soft sport data set corrupted the whole one as a result of strong correlations, while the bad one is just really weak. I think what this data set shows mainly is that you can't afford to die a lot on soft sports, so keeping your KD overall high increases survival percentage, which in turn leads to more rounds won. Now, was this worth it at all? No, probably not. Most things contained in the script are things that I probably could have guessed if I really thought about it, except for flexes. They don't really have a pattern, so I don't know. I can't tell you what they actually think about them. I think it was worth my time because I enjoy looking at data like this, and I think that it gave me a bit of insight on myself and how to improve upon looking at the data in front of me. And I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. And I hope that you guys took something away from this, and I'd be happy to do more analyses like this if you have any ideas. And until next time, peace. Have a nice day.